Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Hackolade tutorial. In this episode, we'll be talking about how you can use Hackolade to suggest denormalized structures in a normalized data model. This can be really useful, right? For example, when you are contemplating to do some application modernization, for example, or when you are simply migrating data from a relational database management system to some kind of a NoSQL document database or a JSON schema, or whatever it might be, right? In that case, you will be considering how you would design the data model for that new NoSQL storage format, and you will probably be basing it on some kind of an access pattern, right? So we have a very good and separate tutorial and a separate article about this, but you're going to do some modeling that is going to leverage the concepts and the structure of denormalized data models in that new modernized environment. So what we're going to be showing you here in this tutorial is that you can use a tool like the Hackolade Studio to implement that denormalized structure, right? It's very important, however, that you realize that this is something that you should be thinking about up front. You don't do this randomly, you don't do this haphazardly. You would do the denormalization in a very structured way based on the analysis of your access patterns. Right, so what we'll be showing you a little bit later is an example of the Northwind database. You probably know this from many demo databases that you've seen over the years, where you have an orders table, right, with all the lists of the orders, right, row by row, and then order details table, where for every order ID, you would have a reference to a product and a quantity of that order line as it would appear on the order specifically. Right, so this is an example of a set of tables that contain a foreign key relationship and that you could potentially denormalize. So therefore, in the Hackolade Studio, we can help you do that denormalization, but you should really take care while doing so, right? So you do this 2 tables at a time, you don't try to do more at a time, right? And then you have to specifically select, what type of embedding you want to be using in your denormalization, right? So there's different ways that you can do this, depending on the direction and the cardinality of your relationship. Right? So in one direction, you might be able to say subdocument in child. In the other direction, that would most likely then become array in parent, right? So, and you could also consider implementing both, if you are implementing the extended reference pattern, for example. And you can obviously also edit this when necessary, right? And take it for a spin and see how that plays out. Right, so let's take a look at that. Right, so in the one direction, right, where you would be embedding an array in the parent, right, you can see on the left what the current structure is in the normalized data model, and in the denormalized data model, you would modify the orders entity to have an array of order details listed inside it. Right, that's the resulting denormalization, right? In the other direction, right, if you would like to be embedding subdocuments in a child, then what happens is that in the order details collection or entity, you would all of a sudden have a list of subdocuments where the products would be contained, right? So this is how the resulting denormalization would play out. Right, so why don't we take a look at that, and I'll switch to my Hackolade environment now and show you how this is done. So here we are, we have the Northwind data model right here, the normalized version of it, where we have the orders entity and the order details entity, right? And they're linked to each other through this relationship. So what I'll do next is I'll go to my tools menu and say, why don't we suggest the denormalization, right? And then I select the 2 entities involved. I select 2 entities at a time, right? And I say, okay, why don't you do a subdocument in child first, or actually, yeah, let's do that, right? And when you do that, you see that what has happened here, right? So let me restructure this a little bit, right? And show you how this is done, right? So now we have modified the order details table here, and it now has this nested structure where the product details of the orders are included inside this entity. Right, so that's one way of doing it, but let's undo this for now and go back to our original structure, right? So this is what it used to look like at the beginning. And now I'll do the other direction, right? And I'll basically do the denormalization the other direction. We can save this and we say, okay, why don't you do this, right? Array in parent, right? And when you do that, in my view, this is actually a little bit more logical, because then what you would have is over here in the orders entity, you would have all the order details embedded inside that document. Right, so that's really logical, and two great examples of how you can use the Hackolade Studio to suggest denormalization. So let's wrap this up here, and I would highly recommend that you would read up on this, obviously, in our documentation, our blog, the excellent MongoDB data modeling book, particularly relevant here because the patterns are one of the coolest parts of this book. I would definitely take a look at that, and with that, I'm going to wrap up this tutorial and wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much.